Well, good morning. With us only having an hour together for this wonderful workshop, I want to go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce you to our presenters. Today we have with us Erica Goldthorp. She is Director of Product Development and Instructional Design at ProSolutions, and Denise Payton, Senior Associate at ProSolutions Training. We are so excited to have you, and I am absolutely thrilled that this is the workshop that I get to provide tech support in. Without any further interruption, we're going to go ahead and hand the presentation over to Denise and Erica. Welcome and thank you.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
For, our introduction, like she said, I am a Senior Associate on the Instructional Design and Curriculum Development team at ProSolutions Training.
And I'm Erica Goldthorp, and we are so happy to be here with you this morning. We are, as Jennifer said, with ProSolutions Training, which is the online training division of ProSolutions. And we provide training nationwide in early care and education and human services. So we are really happy to be with you this morning to talk about mindful communication and how mindfulness and equity can go hand in hand, especially in your work with families.
Awesome. So I will jump in to show a little bit about what we'll be looking at today. So our goals for learning. We want to really provide you with real-world examples and tools for ways to help yourself become more aware of your own brain state, as well as ways to help support team members and families with more effective methods of communication. So we'll be working on identifying brain state characteristics and how they affect the way we communicate. Then we'll look at ways to constructively communicate with others based on your brain state. And then we'll look at examining how mindful communication is beneficial in supporting equitable relationships. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so in the chat, if you guys would just kind of let us know what hats you wear. So just what are your roles, just to kind of get an idea of who's in the space with us. And we'll give you about a minute or so to just toss that in. Awesome. Social workers, LPCs, foster parents, nice. Lots of social workers, cool. Therapists.
Yes, great.
Nice. Thank you guys for sharing. So it looks like we have a pretty diverse group, and hopefully everyone here will find something that will be beneficial to the work that they do every day.
Absolutely. So we will just dive right in because, as Jennifer said, we only have an hour today. We could talk about this for hours upon hours if we wanted to, but we only have an hour today. So we'll dive right into the brain states. And if you happen to be familiar with the conscious discipline approach, you may have heard of brain states. Conscious discipline is a behavior management technique program for children. Denise and I love it. We use it with our own children. And it was developed by Dr. Becky Bailey. And she shares 3 specific brain states that influence the way that we see the world, which would be our perspective, and also influences our behaviors and our reactions, which in turn affects how we communicate with others. So these brain states are known as the survival state, the emotional state, and the executive state. So ideally, we would love for all of our communication to happen from that executive state. I mean, that means that we are using all of our critical thinking, all of our reasoning, all of our higher level brain functioning when we're communicating, but we know that that just isn't reality. That's not how humans operate. That's not how we're wired. And certainly when we're thinking about trauma and families that are involved in social services in some way, that's just not the case. So as professionals, when we're working together with families, being mindful of these brain states can be really helpful when we're communicating and to have effective communication. But it also helps us become better listeners. So you'll kind of hear a little bit of a trauma-informed slant to this presentation this morning, because we know that listening is one of those first steps that we can take to create more equitable environments when we're working with families and children. So we will take a look now at each of these brain states. As we know, communication is the exchange of information in a system where we're using common symbols and behaviors. So we get it. We understand, what the other person is doing, what they mean by that. And it sounds really simple, but communication is really complicated. And we know there are a lot of factors that go into how we share information and how we receive it. And that can be our individual personalities, that can be our communication styles, that can be a lot of external factors of what's going on in our lives all around us. So understanding the brain states can really help us better navigate communication. So we're able to say things the way that we mean them. And we're also able to understand the information that's being shared with us when we understand another person's brain state. So let's look a little deeper dive into each of these 3 brain states. So first up, we have the survival state. And this is all about needing to feel safe and secure. So family members that are operating from this survival brain state may express themselves either verbally or physically, hopefully not a lot of physically, but in physically aggressive ways, or they may be really defensive and react very defensively to comments or feedback that may not necessarily be meant in a negative way, but they are perceived as a threat. And when we look at the survival state in children, these are children who are often might be aggressive, they're hypervigilant. So any movement, sudden noises might be a trigger for them. They might hit unexpectedly, take things away, have meltdowns. So these are these children and families alike are operating in this brain state where they are just needing to survive. And so everything is seen as a threat, and their brain is using all of its power to keep them safe. And there really is no room for those higher level executive functioning skills. So, as you're listening, be thinking about the children, the families that you work with, and what might be contributing situations that might be contributing to them operating in that survival brain state. Okay, so next up, we have the emotional state. And this emotional state revolves around a sense of appreciation and belonging. So when we're creating a relationship culture that fairly and regularly works to support all families, it's important because families feel connected and they form stronger relationships. And we know that that relationship is really at the base of being successful in a lot of our work. So these stronger relationships really lay the groundwork for that thoughtful, effective communication that's really at the heart of any successful intervention, parenting program, any program that we're working on, goals that we're creating with families. And so, some examples of family members who might be operating from an emotional brain state, they can go either way. They may go above and beyond to unreasonable extents, or they may push away. They may push against the systems that are there to support them, the case managers, the individuals who are there to support them and help them in their goals. And so, when we consider support systems and professionals, we can think about some of the possible examples of either a professional working from this emotional brain state or a family working from this emotional brain state, because it affects us as professionals and families. And so, one example of that might be, someone who offers to take on multiple caseloads. Maybe they volunteer for extra work. Sounds crazy. But then they may constantly talk about, obstacles, or, oh my gosh, I have so many cases, or I can't do all this, too many families' needs that I need to accommodate. Or, it could be a professional who is constantly apologizing to families for their responsibilities. So I'm so sorry, I have to ask you to fill this out. It's just policy. I have to make you do this. It's not me. It's not me, but I'm sorry. So, apologizing a lot for things that really, there's no apology needed. Okay. And then finally, we have this executive brain state, which is, where we would love to operate from at all times. And this is the place where our logical and thoughtful and problem-solving brain really comes in to help guide us towards a resolution. We're using all of those higher level executive functioning skills to solve our problems and to communicate. And this is where the mindful, intentional interaction happens. And it takes the pause and plan approach to communication, and regularly uses these active listening tools for better understanding. So people who are operating from the executive brain state have an inner speech, or you may have heard called an inner monologue. And this is an uplifting, positive, and encouraging inner speech. We're telling ourselves positive things. We're, positive energy there. And the inner speech is really just simply the way that we talk to ourselves, especially when we experience these moments of miscommunication or conflict. Are we always seeing it in a negative sort of way, or are we seeing it more in a positive way? If there is a conflict or if there is a miscommunication, I'm guilty of being one of those people that always jumps to worst case scenario. My brain can go as far into the worst case scenario as possible, instead of seeing things in a more positive way of, telling myself that's really unlikely. What you're thinking right now is really unlikely to happen. But, I just kind of naturally go there. But the executive brain state is really only reached by a mindful approach. And this not only means being mindful of our own brain state, but also being very mindful of others' brain states. And this is really critical when we're working with families. So now that we've recapped those very quickly, we'll do a little poll. And so we have 3 scenarios here on the screen. If you can just pop your answer into the chat. We're looking for which scenario do you believe to be someone operating from an emotional brain state. So first we have members of various workplace teams work together to create an intervention plan for a family or an organization. Number 2 is a family member becomes upset and storms out of a meeting when they're asked about their living arrangements. And then number 3 is we have a home visitor regularly expresses regret to a family about the time of a scheduled home visit, even though the family hasn't expressed upset over the timing.
I see a lot of threes.
I do too. So you guys are on it.
Very proud
You
of
guys are
that.
absolutely right. Number three
Yeah.
is that emotional brain state. Number one would be that executive state where we're all working together. And number two would be more of that survival brain state where, you know, something is seen as a threat and our survival skills immediately kick in there. So now that we've looked at this, we are going to switch and look at communication based on each of these brain states.
All right, welcome everyone. This is Denise, and I do apologize because, of course, today is the day the camera didn't work for me, so you'll just get to hear my lovely voice. So while it may be a bit of extra work, and there definitely will be exceptions, it's usually possible to find ways to communicate with most people most of the time. But one of the biggest barriers to effective communication are our preconceived notions. First off, we often go into conversations with ideas about how we want to say something, and we first think to communicate in the way that generally works best for us rather than what may be best for the person that we are talking to. And then secondly, we also tend to have a preconceived idea about how the information will be received. So of course, again, when we're talking to someone who communicates and thinks like we do, it tends to work pretty well. However, if we're speaking to somebody with a different communication style or personality than ours, or just speaking to someone in a different brain state than we are, that communication can come across very, very differently. So if we don't take a moment to truly consider our audience before sharing our communication, then the way we share that information may toss a huge stumbling block towards understanding each other. And of course, communication, that's the goal. So with survival state communication, when we're talking to someone who is operating in that brain state of survival, we know already that someone who's operating from a survival state typically comes across as maybe aggressive or even overly defensive. So the first thing is to recognize that this is happening and to Q-tip, which I'm sure if you have any teachers in the room, you know what that means, quit taking it personally. So there's a book called The Four Agreements. It's written by Don Miguel Ruiz, and we have the resource available as well. But this is described as one of the 4 things we can do in our general lives that help us get out of our heads and extend understanding and grace to the people around us. Now, this happens very intentionally through mindful practice, and using these mindful practices helps us with the second part of communicating with someone in a survival state, which is maintaining composure, okay? So composure is our ability to stay calm whenever there's big, heavy, surprising, emotionally triggering situations. When someone who's in the survival state reacts defensively, I would never, why are you picking on me? Those kinds of things, or even aggressively, I don't want to talk about this, or get out of my house. It can become important for the initiator of the conversation to remain calm and in control of their executive brain. So mindfulness is a process and it's built over time. Think of it like any other muscle. It has to be exercised regularly to become strong. So right now, I want everyone to think about behaviors that are triggering to you, okay? So one example I always give is not being looked at when I'm being talked to, right? So even while you're sitting here, you can make a list of these triggers, or if you want, you can maybe even share a few in the chat, just to kind of give us all an idea that we're not all out here alone feeling, all the things. So while you're thinking about those, now think about what you tell yourself when you experience these triggers, okay? So for example, if my trigger is not being looked at while speaking, in my head, I might tell myself, they don't respect me. That's why they won't look me in the eye, right? So this sentence is what we call a story. It creates a story about what we think the other person's motives are. And of course, I can't truly know that unless I'm a mind reader. So understanding that the story that we tell ourselves, that story then fuels how we respond. So instead of running with that story, the story that our mind has made up about what we think this other person means by what they're doing, try to replace it with something more positive to change or shift your perspective. So for example, instead of thinking I'm being disrespected, I might tell myself, oh, maybe they didn't realize I was talking to them. Let me call their name. So this new story puts me into a different way of seeing the situation, which then allows me to extend more grace and understanding in the moment, okay? Obviously, of course, there will be times when people will continuously, do things that feel disrespectful, and that will affect the relationship, and of course will need to be addressed, and we'll talk a little bit more about these things later on. But the goal here is to develop some personal tools that help support that movement towards more equitable and mindful relationships, okay? Oh, I see a couple here interrupting me while I'm talking. Yes, that is huge, huge. All right. So another tool for your tool belt. This is called the pivot. So if you've ever played basketball or even watched it, you may have seen a move where the player plants one foot on the ground and then uses the other foot to change positions, right? This is usually to avoid a penalty of some type, like traveling or moving without bouncing the ball, or to give time to assess the situation for the best move or the best play. This is also true when working on being a mindful communicator. It's important for us to remember that everyone, including ourselves, has triggering moments. When this happens, we start to tell ourselves a story that creates a version of that situation in our heads related to that trigger. And then again, this perspective determines how we react and can either make the difference in the conversation being productive or just kind of blowing up, completely. So just like in basketball, right? The pivot can be used to give us time to assess a situation for the next best move when we are triggered during a conversation or an interaction. So let's go back to my original trigger example. So maybe I walk into someone's home, I'm doing a home visit, and instead of responding to me, and I say good morning, the family member who answers the door just turns their back and walks away, right? So then I speak a little bit louder in case, the family member didn't hear me. But this time they respond with a yeah, right? So not a hello, and they don't turn around. So now I'm kind of feeling my trigger being activated, and I'm hearing that negative story about being disrespected. And my first inclination is probably to step into, addressing the seemingly apparent disrespect, right? So I feel disrespected. I immediately feel like I need to say something to address that, and probably not in a very productive way, right? So let's try the pivot. Let's apply the pivot here. So first, I'm going to take a few steps back, okay? And of course, given your distance and your space and all of these things, you may not physically be able to take 2 steps. Maybe you just pull, your body back a bit. But this physical distance is also a cue to your body to let it know that you're distancing yourself from the triggering situation, okay? So you're giving your body a physical cue that, I feel this trigger, hey, we're stepping back. Secondly, do some type of a way of turning away. So you can either physically turn your body, depending on the safety of the situation and kind of where you are, you may just turn your eyes or your head, you may look down for a moment, turn your head, turn your full body, but just do what is safest and makes the most sense in that moment. But ideally, you just want to give yourself a moment to disconnect from that immediate trigger or even the person doing the triggering, and take a few deep breaths, okay? As you're taking the breaths, you're going to think or say something positive, because again, we're rewriting the story. So maybe you tell yourself, you're okay, this isn't about you, stay calm. And these statements and these breaths help to reset your brain from the triggered state to the executive state, okay? And then thirdly, after you've done your breathing and you've kind of retold the story and reset yourself, focus on that new story. So what can you tell yourself may be a motive, right? That's more productive. So maybe you think, oh, they had a rough day. They're really tired. And this can help change your perspective and allow a calmer and more focused approach, all right? So now let's connect this to equity. In terms of equity, I do want to point out that while sometimes our perceptions are a narrative we've created about others' motivations, sometimes, especially for those who openly identify or perceive to identify as a member of a marginalized group, so we're talking Black, Asian, Pacific Islander, we're talking LGBTQ. Sometimes when you're perceived to be from or in a marginalized group, that disrespectful behavior from others can also be experienced as a microaggression. Okay, so microaggressions are subtle or indirect expressions of discrimination, and they fall into those types of ongoing disrespectful behaviors I mentioned a little bit earlier. So sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about what other people are doing and their motivations are true, okay? Especially again, for those who are considered to be outside the majority culture of our society. So with these types of behaviors, pivoting will not always be enough, okay? And this tool is not meant to minimize that fact. We don't want to say, oh, if you're experiencing this microaggression, all you have to do is turn away and take some breaths, right? That's not necessarily going to work every time. Addressing these types of behaviors will require a more direct and in-depth approach. And that's a big task to consider, okay? And it often means rearranging some things in the bigger scheme of the system in which you work. So the hope of presenting this tool today is so that it can help support your overall mental health and wellness when you're into these different interactions, and hopefully give you an additional tool to help you navigate those difficult interactions. All right, for the emotional state of communication. So generally speaking, right, each of us wants to feel like we matter to the world and to people in the world. So whether this is done through informal acknowledgement or a formal process of recognition, a culture that supports connection is one that sees more productive relationships and collaborations. However, when connecting misses its mark, okay, it can manifest in behaviors such as withdrawal, such as refusals or pushback. It can also look like constant questioning or apologizing for your own actions or even your own presence. And again, while all of us bring what Dr. Esther Perel calls the emotional dowry, or basically our own personal emotional baggage into our each interactions, our attempts at connection can also contribute to whether or not these interactions foster positive feelings or negative feelings, okay? So we all have things that we bring to our communications. We all have things we bring into our interactions, but we can either take the time to make genuine connection, and the way that we do that will either foster positive connections or negative connections, okay? So when you're talking to a person who's operating from the emotional brain step, it's a good first step to take the perspective of creating unity and harmony. So this can happen a few ways. First, talk about how important their role is for the work that is happening and show genuine appreciation for their role in this work. Okay, and this only works if it's consistent and genuine and not in conjunction with an ask or like an added task. If so, the person, of course, will begin to associate the acknowledgement with the knowledge that it only comes when they're being asked to do something. We know how that feels. That doesn't feel like it's coming from a genuine place of appreciation. So this then can increase those feelings of disconnect, because it shows the person that not only are they not genuinely valued, but like this value is only important when I need something from you, okay? The second thing you can do is highlight the specific ways the person supports the work being done. So just like with children, we want our praise to be specific and unique to the individual rather than just that blanket, oh, you did a good job, or, thank you very much. Generalized compliments versus comments. So generalized compliments show a lack of thought, okay? And that again can foster that feeling of not really truly and genuinely feeling connected. So you want to highlight specific ways that they've done something to contribute in a good way to your interaction, your relationship, or the work being done. And then finally, communicating choices is another way to help create an atmosphere of connection while also providing opportunities for people to exercise their power. So often when we're in the emotional brain state, the person feels more tuned in to their victim state rather than their empowered state, right? So offering opportunities offering choices and chances for them to provide input or suggestion, or to make choices about things that occur within the work or the support that is being offered, puts them more into a place of empowerment. So allowing choices also shows a level of trust in their ability to contribute, which of course, when people feel trusted, when they feel connected, that drives that positive connection. Okay, lots of information here, so hopefully, and we're taking questions at the end, so if anything is unclear, you guys, please let us know towards the end of the presentation. All right, so let's talk about empathy. So another added benefit to building connection is that the more connected a person feels, the more comfortable they become in vocalizing their needs and their ideas. These contributions go a long, long way in revealing areas where more equity can be created. And it also allows them to share their firsthand perspectives about how that can happen, right? So sometimes a lack of communication isn't due to a lack of desire to be connected. And I think we all kind of know that. Each of us desires to be valued and connected within our worlds. But it might also be related to feeling the differences in the racial or the social or cultural or financial access between themselves and the outside world. So when we approach communication in a mindful manner, we increase our ability to truly hear others and to make changes that are based on actual needs versus what we think is needed or our own beliefs about what is needed. So in order to take our beliefs out of the equation, it requires us to operate from a place of empathy, okay? Empathy is the ability to relate to what others are feeling. Very, very simple, right? I feel with you. I feel what you feel. Often though, when we think we are exhibiting true, mature empathy, what we're really showing is immature empathy. Okay, so here are 4 types of immature empathy. Number 1, ignoring empathy. This is when we focus more on behaviors than connection. So no one is going to listen to you when you yell about the issue. So instead of listening to what they're saying, we're calling out their behavior. Number 2, saving empathy. This is when we try to push others past their upset feelings instead of acknowledging them. And often we do that because it's uncomfortable for us to see someone uncomfortable, or it's embarrassing, that bystander embarrassment feelings. We want to push them past their upset feelings. So I know that bothered you, but things aren't like that now, and it's going to be okay. You know, we just kind of dismiss what they're feeling. Number 3, punishing empathy is when we show upset towards the person who shared their feelings. So instead of, again, hearing what they're saying, we get upset with them for sharing it. So we may hear something like, now remember, everyone doesn't think like you do, and when you talk that way, it will upset them. Maybe you shouldn't bring that up again. Okay, so that's punishing empathy. And number 4, dismissing empathy. And this is when we brush aside someone's behavior without even acknowledging the feeling that prompted the behavior. So maybe we say, what was your goal in saying that? Just let it go and get back to work, right? So we don't even acknowledge what they're feeling. We just kind of dismiss what they said and what they acknowledge, and then we just, kind of move on with our day. So I don't know if many of you have heard of Brene Brown, but we have a video from her to explain some empathy.
What is empathy and why is it very different from sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman.
Denise or Erica, is there a way to get the volume to go up?
Very diverse profession. Where empathy
Say that one more time.
The volume, we're not able to hear it on the video.
Okay, thank you. Hold on, I want to call her name. Lafayette Young. So I just saw the share sound. So I'm going to see if I can start it over and then play it. And then you guys hopefully will be able to hear it. Okay. Just let me know in the chat.
So what is
Awesome. Okay, here we go.
empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right, coming back from you. So what was one takeaway from the video that you think applies to the work of creating equity through mindful communication? And you can toss them into the chat. Yes, lots of love for the video. I feel like she just explains it spot on in a very, very beautiful and helpful way.
And you guys will also be able to get a link to this video on the Cadence platform. In the same place, you'll be able to get a copy of the slides.
Yes, connections are the most meaningful. Response versus connection. We all love Brene Brown. Yes. What often makes things better is connecting. And connection is a huge and necessary part to creating equity, because when, again, you're connected, people feel that genuine relationship, and they feel comfortable and safe in sharing what they need to share in order for us to understand the people who are in positions to support what they actually need versus what we think they need. And that's hugely important when we're talking about building equity and building equitable systems through conversations. All right. Erica, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so we've got a couple of group polls here.
Yeah, so we can just toss these into the chat, but we're going to look at each of these statements here and decide, which brain state actually applies here. So the first one we have is we are all in this together. So is this survival brain state, executive brain state, the skill of empathy, or unity and the emotional brain state? And you can just toss it in the chat. We'll breeze through these because we still have a little bit more content to go. So this is actually the emotional brain state. This is unity in the emotional brain state. The we're in this together piece is really pulling on the emotion of we're together, we're sharing this same emotion. Okay, next is I can imagine how you must feel. Brene Brown just told us the answer to this with that amazing video. So yeah, this is the skill of empathy. This is, feeling what others are feeling and sharing that empathy. I can pivot when triggered. So is this survival, executive, empathy, or the emotional brain state?
Nice job, you guys.
You could think it's executive. That's an easy sort of, this is a little tricky. But this is actually that survival brain state. This is, when I'm triggered, when my survival skills are triggered and I am protecting myself and I perceive a threat, I can pivot and sort of get myself out of that state into a more executive brain state. Okay. And last we have, I am focused and ready to listen and learn. And you guys are right. This is the executive state. This is, where we're using all of those higher order thinking and functioning skills in our brain to be focused and ready and present and able to listen to someone else.
Nice. All right, you guys. So now let's link the mindful communication skills, the brain states, and look at how that connects to ways of growing equity. So I want everyone to take a look at this picture and think about the question: what is the difference between equality and equity? And just take just a few seconds. If you want to share, we would love to see your responses, of course. What is the difference between equality and equity? So let's look at the definitions. Equality is about giving every person the exact same thing, okay? Equity means giving each person what they need to be successful, okay? So the point of equity is to find out what success looks like for an individual and then providing them what they need to reach those goals. And in order to do that, mindful, empathetic communication is key. Equity requires listening to find out what the specific needs are and how to address them. It means becoming more self-aware, to know what brain state you are in as an individual, and then to be able to recognize when you are triggered and why a particular comment or suggestion or interaction was triggering for you. And this is a very mindful process. It involves taking time to pivot, to breathe, and re-engage your executive brain and examine and dissect those feelings that are making it difficult for you to hear what these individuals need. Once you engage your executive state, listening becomes easier and progress can move forward. With the executive brain engaged, focus becomes clearer, and the desire to learn and problem solve in collaboration with other people becomes the primary motivators. It becomes less about your trigger and more about how can I be a good listener? How can I meet them where they are? And how can I provide these support systems, okay? Mindful communication aids in building relationships because as people feel heard and seen, trust forms. And trust matters when you're working towards equity. Those who will benefit the most from equitable practices have to trust that when they share their thoughts or when they share their ideas or their collaborations or their needs, right? When they tell you what they need, that the people with the power to support them and to act will do so and do so in a very genuine way. Mindfully speaking and listening, along with taking actionable and targeted steps towards dismantling inequitable systems, can and will make a difference for the people that you interact with and work with on a daily basis.
Okay, so I know we just went through a lot of information and we wanted to save some time at the end for discussion and Q&A. But just a few points here to think about for the content that we've shared today. Number one is that we all bring, as Denise mentioned, this emotional dowry into all of our interactions, our experiences throughout our lives, our own personal traumas. Many of us get into this field because of our personal experiences. And so being aware of our own triggers is really important as we are doing the work and as we are working with families. And secondly, mindful communication honors this fact and really allows each of us to show empathy towards each other. And I know I saw a comment earlier that, this is hard and it sounds really simple, but it is a very hard thing to do. And I've heard Denise say many times that, mindfulness is like a muscle. You have to practice it. You have to be conscious of these different points in communication to really refine that mindful thinking and communication for yourself and in your work. And so it becomes a little easier the more that we practice mindful communication.
Right. Very true.
Third, sorry, Denise, go ahead.
No, I was saying that's very, very true. It gets easier over time, but you have to start somewhere,
Right.
So.
Right. And we have to have enough self-awareness, to be able to get ourselves into that executive state and really practice all of these techniques. So third is that, strong work relationships are built when people feel connected, and not just work relationships, your relationships with the families that you're working with. We know that connection is absolutely critical for success in any of the work that we're doing with families. And so these strong connections make people feel safe and they make them feel heard within their own environments. And then finally, safe, connected relationships are creating that space for you to have tough conversations and to work on challenging goals and with your families to see overall growth and success as they define success for their family. So this is just a slide about us, about ProSolutions Training. We'd love for you to check us out if you haven't been familiar with us. We also offer some mandated reporter trainings that are available free through our partnership with DFACS. So that is a resource available to you through our course offerings. And so now I know Jennifer's going to facilitate some Q&A and some discussion. So any questions, points of discussion, we'd be happy to have great conversation. We always love the Q&A session on this particular presentation.
Joy Rodriguez has a question. In the chat, Joy, is the link to the Amazon for the book, but I'll let you ladies, if you want to share a little bit about the book, the 4 Agreements.
Sure, I would love to. It's like my favorite thing that I share with everybody all the time. So the 4 Agreements is written by, it's called a Toltec wisdom book. So he's an elder in his culture, and he's written about these 4 things that you can do to just allow you to extend grace to the people that you're interacting with and living with just in the world. So of course, one of them is not taking things personally. One is always do your best, and knowing that your best is going to look different every day, and he kind of breaks that down. And of course, I can't recall the other 2, probably if I sat here and said a couple more times, but I won't take all of the suspense out of reading the book. So, But the 4 things specifically for this, in terms of not taking things personally, is hugely important when you're talking about taking your own beliefs out of the conversation and building equity by listening to the people around you who need to express these things or who would benefit the most, and just becoming really good at understanding that everything and every way that people act or interact with you has nothing necessarily to do with you or anything that you've done, right? Sometimes it does, right? And when people bring us those things, we need to be very self-aware, like we talked about, and just building that awareness and that ability to listen. But for the most part, if we approach our interactions with the idea that everyone is having their own day at any given time, and extending grace when we interact with each other can help create like less of that friction. So if like we go into it thinking everybody's against us or they're coming against us, we tend to react that way, and that can exacerbate difficult conversations. But if you were to approach it as, well, this person, you know, maybe having a billion other things going on that have nothing to do with me. He says that in the book, like thinking everything is about you is a very egocentric way to live your life, you know? Just going into it and being very open to extending grace. Oh, Shonda, yes, extending grace to others, absolutely. Can go a really long way in having mindful communication and building equity.
And besides just lots of great conversation of people validating and affirming what you shared today, there's nothing, not a question popping out. Does anybody have some questions for Denise and Erica that they'd like to share or ask?
And although my camera is not here, this lovely picture on this last slide is me with my daughter. So you can
so sweet.
Of what the face is behind the word. Oh yes, being impeccable with your word. Thank you.
Oh, we've got a question. The question. Oh, thank you, Darcy. Appreciate that. She's using the platform like we're supposed to.
Right.
Darcy's asking, great information. In children, do the brain states and ability to embody them tend to correlate with developmental stages, such as a young child may have limited or no ability to get to the executive state?
I'm nodding my head. I think Erica has answered this one before too, but we're nodding
Yeah,
our head.
I can feel Denise nodding her head. Yes. So yes, this is true. So we know that a 2-year-old does not have the ability to think logically and reason, and they don't have those critical thinking skills. Yes, they're living often in this emotional state. We get the tantrums, but this is how they are expressing their emotions because they haven't been given tools to learn how to regulate their emotions, how to express their emotions in, you know, what we would consider socially acceptable ways. And so how we interact with children is what is building those brain, you know, those executive functioning skills in their brains. So, you know, the way, and this is really the crux of conscious discipline that Denise and I love so much. It's really more about how we as adults interact with children and react to children's behavior to help them gain those tools to be able to self-regulate and grow in their own executive functioning skills, because we know that the human brain is not fully developed until into adulthood. So
Right.
always working on those executive function skills. And even as adults, as we've just, you know, discussed, we often live in that, still in that survival and emotional state, and probably less often in that executive state. So we're always working on ourselves in that manner.
We do have another
Thank you,
question.
Shonda.
Ashley DePasso, she says, what is one technique you've used for someone in the survival state, specifically a teenager who has experienced trauma, to their executive state and move forward with healing? Ooh, that's a deep
Very good question.
Wow.
I would love to jump in here. So the oldest I've personally worked with have probably been like sixth graders when I was teaching. So not necessarily high schoolers or teenagers. But I think for me, one of the biggest things is providing space and just working on demonstrating a consistently genuine desire to be connected or to be there as a support system. So even if that means setting very firm boundaries as far as like hurtful or harmful or disrespectful behavior, right? Like I'm here for you, but these are the things that I can and cannot, kind of handle. But then also doing that in a way that is consistent and being very patient. I think a lot of times time is the best indicator. Time and consistent behavior is the best way to help shift someone into a space where they feel like they can trust who you are, your motivations, your interactions, and you just can't get tired, right? You can't kind of throw in the towel or say this is taking too long. Same way I think with toddlers. I often compare toddlers and teenagers because it's that strive for independence, but then also the necessary understanding that they still need a lot of support, so you're trying to find that balance. But I think offering that support while giving choices that are, make sense and giving those firm boundaries about what is safe and what is not safe has worked for me, at least in the past, in working with older children who have kind of gone through some traumatic experiences.
And I would also add, that's a big leap to get from, that emotional state to that executive state. And that's going to be a very slow process.
Right.
Likely with any child who has experienced trauma, especially a teenager, if they've experienced trauma consistently throughout their lives, that's going to take a big leap. So definitely, first of all, understanding those traumas and identifying those traumas is going to be a big critical component of that. And then, as Denise said, firm boundaries. And we talk about this a lot with children of, you feel bad for what a child has gone through or is going through, but letting them bend the rules, letting it slide for them and not others is not helping, is not really helping that growth and helping them through what they're experiencing.
Oh, you're welcome, Ashley. And thank you guys so much for enjoying and kind of taking something away. I see a lot of people are saying, I feel like I can use my child, my children, and Erica and I feel the same way. This is huge. It's huge for so many different arenas. Just mindful communication. Communicating is the way the world turns, so being able to do that mindfully and in a very self-aware way can make a huge difference.
Well, any more questions before we end this? Oh, we do. Wait, hold on, Chandra. She says, I'm wondering if the brain states are connected to the inner workings on our brains, like limbic cortex.
Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yes. And Becky Bailey talks about that, even if you do like trauma-informed practice or trauma-informed care or anything kind of related to the trauma response in the body and responding to that, especially like the survival state. So you are talking about the limbic area, your emotional state is like that limbic area where your memories are stored and kind of how that whole system is triggered by those connections between traumatic experiences and how your body responded. And then that survival state, of course, is that primitive part of your brain.
Brainstem right there on the back.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Erica, the brainstem. And then that prefrontal cortex is executive state. So it's, all the higher order thinking, definitely.
It's wonderful. Well, thank you both. Truly enjoyed it. My daughter read this book and I know her therapist recommended it to her and she got a lot out of it. So I'm going to steal it from her and read it myself. But we've got in the chat the evaluation. It's my understanding you just need to fill out that evaluation one time for the day. Tomorrow will be a new link. So we were wrong on that. So you just have to fill it out one time. Also, you'll see the link to the book as well as the link to the YouTube video for Brene Brown And yes, their handouts are available in Cadence. You'll go to the materials and resources. But just want to thank both of you again. Everybody, our lunchtime networking session, you're not going to want to miss. There's going to be some surprises and sneak peeks. ProSolutions will be there. They have a brand new track for training that they're going to be discussing. We're really excited to share that, and then some other sneak peeks, some prevention initiatives and prizes of those that won some of the books will be announced during that session too. And we promise to give you time, a little break before our keynote speaker, so that way we can get some lunch and use the facilities. But thank you again, and just wonderful. I put the evaluation in the chat. I'll put it in again. Hang tight, Ms. Elaine. But otherwise, again, thank you, everyone. I'll hold off on ending the meeting so that way I can put the evaluation link back in.
Yes, thank you guys so much.
Yes, appreciate it.
I think we need to have a longer one of these. I could see like a series of these where we talk a little bit deeper about each of the emotional states.
Yes, Denise and I would love like a 3 or 4 hour.
I am literally obsessed with the brain states, trauma-informed care. I started teaching yoga to take it into my childcare center where I was a director at one point. And that has just evolved. It's just exploded. And Erica's wonderful. She just kind of supports me and all of my little obsessions. So.
Well, you guys let me know if you want to do maybe a 3-part series where we dive a little bit deeper. We can look at that.
For sure. We're always trying to figure out what we have to cut out to get to an hour.
Yeah.
Because we have so much content.
Well,
Yes,
we'll see everybody
shortly.
Thank you again. 11:45 is when we kick off our networking.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Alrighty, thanks everyone.
You guys. All right, bye-bye.